Hello and welcome to another episode of the Silk and Steel podcast. I am your host, Carl Zha. Today, I'm joined by Arnaud Bertrand, a French entrepreneur and long-term resident of China, and a prolific commentator on Twitter. Arnaud, I invited you today. But first of all, welcome to the show again, and I welcome you to the show today to talk about specifically the Macron visit to China. What has it accomplished, and why is he even there? Maybe we can just go from there, Arnaud.
Sure. I mean, to be honest, it's a bit strange because there were some stated purposes for his visit from the French side. So one of them was to speak about the trade imbalance between China and France and Europe. Another one was the usual, rhetoric on the Ukraine war, where they want China to help, even though, at this stage, I don't think even Macron believes that it is realistic, but at least that's what they're telling the French public. And he also came with a very large French delegation of, I think, something like 40 CEOs. So clearly another purpose of the visit was business, simply to, sign contracts and so on and so forth. And all in all, I guess the last purpose of the visit was to, sort of position France as an interlocutor of China, which has, to be fair, historically been the role of France, because we were the first country in the West to establish diplomatic relations with China in the 1960s, 1964 exactly, if I remember correctly, with de Gaulle, which was almost 10 years before the Americans. So there is this long tradition. France has, I would say you could call it a special relationship normally with China. So it was in that tradition, and in fact, Macron was shown a lot of respect by China during his visit, because she personally accompanied him to Sichuan. They visited Chengdu and Dujiangyan together, which is extremely rare, that she goes outside Beijing on some sort of a touristic visit with a foreign leader, especially a Western leader. I checked. I think that no Chinese leader has ever done that with any American president, for instance. So it was a big mark of respect. So actually, in that regard, the visits from both sides went pretty well. But as soon as Macron set foot back in France, and this is a typical Macron move, unfortunately, he started to threaten China by saying that Europe would apply similar style tariffs on China than Trump did this year, even though the Trump tariffs, of course, came down. So yeah, it's a bit bizarre. What I wrote on Twitter is that it's like the complete reverse of what you normally do. Normally, you state your grievances ahead of a visit, and then you work things out during the visit to, at the end, announce, something like, all is good in the relationship, everything is restored, and so on. Macron goes to China, have a nice visit, and so on. On his way back, he starts negotiating, which is a bit strange and very counterproductive, of course, because from China's standpoint, I guess it's seen as, we brought out the red carpet for you, and then the first thing you do when you go back to France is, spit on us. So that's not very proper, right? So yeah, that's it's a bit depressing, but that's Macron for you. He already did something a bit similar to that the last time he came to China. So yeah, it's also why I found it a bit strange that he's shown so much respect by the Chinese side, because that was to be expected. So I don't know kind of what's going on exactly here. There is something I don't understand.
Well, I noted that on Twitter that Macron seems to be way more popular in China than he is in his home country of France. You have all these fans chasing him down in China. You don't see that in France. But yeah, I this is exactly what I was thinking. I was recalling his last visit, which has always been also been very positively received inside China. There was a lot wall-to-wall coverage. He was showing a lot of goodwill, and he was actually talking the talk. The last visit, he was talking about Europe need to strike out with its strategic autonomy, pilot an independent chart away, not just blindly follow America, which he got a lot of flack for in the European press. But then when he went back home, I mean, all that talk didn't really translate into action. He was still pretty much following U.S. lead on China. Now, for his latest kind of tirade against China, who do you think his audience is? Who is he speaking to on this raising tariff on China?
So a quite common theory in Europe and in France is that Macron is at the end of his political career in France, clearly. In fact, in many ways, he's not in power anymore because he's kind of a lame duck president, right? He doesn't even have control over the government anymore. So he's just in a representative role, and he has like 2 years left on his mandate, even a bit less, and he will be gone. And so a common theory is that he's aiming for a top EU role as the next step in his career, maybe something like von der Leyen's position, and that therefore his rhetoric. Because if you look at his rhetoric, he's not speaking on behalf of France. He's speaking on behalf of Europe. So he's saying Europe will put in place those tariffs, when actually he doesn't have the power to say that, because at this stage he can only speak for France, right? He can't speak for Europe. And I'm pretty sure that other European countries, such as Germany, for instance, will find issue with what Macron is saying, because even though they export less and less to China, it's still a very important trade partner for them. So my guess is that he's starting to position himself as kind of the tough guy for Europe, defending Europe's interests and so on and so forth. But my take is that by doing what he just did, he antagonizes China, of course, and he antagonizes other European countries who are like, no, wait, you're not speaking for us. Like, at least, I don't know, consult with us before, starting a trade war with China, maybe. So yeah, it's not exactly logical from a political standpoint, but yeah, and it's fairly this sort of attitude is fairly typical of Macron, where he's famous in France for what we call en même temps, which means at the same time or in the meanwhile, where basically he will try to cater to every audience at the so he doesn't have a backbone, basically. So where he's gonna, you can find declaration of him which are like borderline Marxists, like to attract extreme left, and then borderline fascists to attract the extreme right. And that's a bit the same thing he did there. If you listen, in China, he spoke to students at university, And I listened to him, and I was like, wow, I agree with every word of what he's saying. Like, the world should be together. We shouldn't, have divisive rhetoric and so on. Like, well, yeah, sure, of course, that's great. And then the first thing he does when he comes back to France is like, have extremely divisive rhetoric, which is all about threatening China and almost Trumpian like rhetoric. So yeah, it's that's Macron for you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I understand why he's always given such grand reception in China, because from Chinese perspective, China remember France as Charles de Gaulle's France, when de Gaulle actually piloted a independent policy, including quitting NATO, recognizing China. And I guess the hope is that Macron maybe at least could pick up some crumb of de Gaulle or picking up some mantle. But that's obviously misplaced, because, Macron, as you say, he knows how to talk to the right audience. He geared toward his audience. But the problem is, today we live in such an interconnected world. It's not like what you say in Europe will not be heard back in China. I mean, like, people will just think, okay, this guy is not serious. You can't trust him at his words. But did is his trip just mostly for commercial purposes, and did he accomplish his goal, just a signed contract with the French companies in China?
Not obvious. There were talks of China buying a lot of Airbus planes, for instance, but apparently they didn't concretize. Both sides said that they signed like 12, understandings around certain topics and so on, but this is kind of lukewarm stuff. I don't think there were any like big orders of for French companies. At least I haven't seen any public announcements around that. So I think that that was pretty disappointing from a French business standpoint. Of course, I have no idea why that is the case. Some theories regarding the Airbus planes is that China wants to retain also leverage with Trump, because orders of planes is always, big leverage. And so, they can always tell Trump, we can buy Boeing planes, for instance. So, I'm sure there are those types of consideration. And maybe also, future leverage with Europe as well. Maybe they don't want to play the Airbus card right now and reserve that order for the future. So, yeah. But, yeah, all in all, the trip seems to have been relatively unproductive at most levels. Like, the joke in French media is that the only thing he got was a panda, because there was a promise of replacement panda being sent to a zoo in France, because 2 pandas were sent back to a bit sick. So that was agreed upon, but it's pretty much the only very concrete thing that came out of the trip.
Then why? The question is, why is he doing this trip during the last leg of his presidency, when he is, in fact, the lame duck president? It's just for his legacy, like, why? What's the point?
Yeah, it's. I think he's relatively diplomatically incompetent, to be honest, because China is obviously very important to France and to Europe, and we do have subjects with China. I mean, this trade rebalance thing from Europe's standpoint is an issue. We have an issue about uncompetitiveness in Europe, where what French media are saying these days is that we are the emerging countries and China is the developed country. And now we need to inverse things where we're the ones in need of technology transfers from China. And then, of course, China could also help, in terms of leverage vis-a-vis the US. I think this would be a smart geopolitical positioning for Europe, where you're kind of the pivot in the middle, right? Where we would have our own China card that we can have with respect to Trump. So when Trump pushes too much, we can tell him, we have the Chinese on the other side who offer much better deals so you could do something interesting in many respects. But the way this played out, it looks like Macron came with a pretty arrogant attitude, pretty unrealistic objectives that weren't achieved, and nothing was achieved. And he comes back and he starts threatening China, which undermines his whole trip. I mean, then it's a waste of time. I genuinely think it could have been productive, because China really, granted him a lot of respect, showed that the door was opened and so on. So let's capitalize on that. We have this goodwill on the Chinese side. Why not capitalize on it instead of closing the door shut? So yeah, it's just it's sad, to be honest.
What does France hope to get from its interaction with China? I mean, what are the French national interests involved when it comes to China? What kind of relationship does France or the French elite hope to have with China at this point?
I think there are two things. There are the objectives interest, and there is the delusions of the current French leadership. So let's look at the delusions first of all, where they want to rebalance trade with China, where basically their ideal scenario is they sell as much to China as China sells to them. But for that, obviously, you need to have things to sell to China that China is interested in buying, right? Obviously. And that's the issue. The issue is in Europe right now, and particularly in France, we've become quite uncompetitive in many industries, to the extent that the Chinese are like, why would we buy your stuff when the stuff that we make at home are much better quality? So cars are a great example of that. There was a moment where French cars were fairly popular in China. They were mostly located in Wuhan. Wuhan was actually the French car city in China. That's why to this day there is a French school in Wuhan, because there were so many French car executives living there. But drive around in China these days, and it's almost impossible to see a single French car, simply because they're not attractive to Chinese customers, right? So they have their own cars. German cars are still, to some extent, competitive, even though that's on the way down. Tesla is still so on the way down, but French cars, pretty much gone. Otherwise we have, the typical French stuff like fashion or cosmetics or, alcohol, wine, and so on. But that also is on the way down. So, just looking at wine, for instance, I just recently saw that one of the foremost French critics of wine actually did a tour of China, of Chinese vineyards, and he was astonished to see that the quality, as he said, on average, was better than in France. So he didn't say that the best Chinese wine were better than the best French wines. So I think if you look at the top Bordeaux, Grand Cru, and so on, were still above China. He just spoke about the average standard that he thought was better at this stage in China. So you can see a trajectory where bit by bit the Chinese are going to be like, why would we import very expensive French wine when we actually have pretty decent wine in China? And same thing for fashion. You're starting to see luxury fashion brands in China appear. And so bit by bit, you're starting to see a pattern where the Chinese are like, we need less and less stuff from France. And so the solution from the French side is not to be kind of dictatorial about that and say, no, we want you to buy your stuff even though you don't want to. That was the time of the 19th century. That was the problem with it was the exact same issue with the Opium War. That's why the Opium War happened, because there was a huge trade imbalance. China was selling much more stuff to Britain that Britain was selling to China, and so they forced the Chinese to buy opium as a result. But they could do that at the time because they had military superiority, right? So there were the Opium Wars, and they won, and they forced opium down China's throat. That's not possible anymore. That China is too powerful. The French army, I saw the other day, in one day, the Chinese Navy, in terms of tonnage, launched in a single day as many military ships than the entire French Navy in one day. So that's the situation right now. So the solution is therefore to make an effort on our side to gain in competitiveness and trying to find a way to develop products that are interesting to the Chinese market, or to become extremely protectionist on our side, to dramatically reduce the amount of Chinese imports. But that's shooting ourselves in the foot, because then it makes our companies even less competitive. When it's the India story, when you completely close yourself down to the exterior world. Sure, you protect your company. Sure, the trade is balanced somehow. But then, because there is no competition, because your companies are so insulated from competition, then they're completely uncompetitive on a global level. And so we probably don't want that. So that's the reality. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there is expectations on the Ukraine war. So the expectation is that somehow China will side with Europe against Russia. But that is also very unrealistic. Like, why would China go effectively declare war on its biggest neighbor? By the way, the one it has been warring with for millennia. That's why they built the Great Wall, right? So why would they, start again this sort of pattern with being aggressive to their northern neighbor just to please Europeans? That's just delusional. They will never do that. So there is this expectation from Europe, but it won't happen. What China can do, and what it proposed to do, because they proposed a peace plan in 2023, was to play the role of moderator, where they tell the European side, Russia's position, they decide Europe's position. They try to find a genuinely mutually agreeable compromise. But at this stage, Europe doesn't want to compromise. That is the key characteristic of Europe right now. They're just very set in their in their ideology, and very unrealistic because they want to defeat Russia, which is just not possible at this stage. So there is a big gap overall between what Europe wants from China and what can be realistically achieved. So the solution is more changing our mindset in Europe to be much more realistic, because we can get things from China. But if we understand China and if we're realistic about it, if we keep asking for things that are just way out there and just not possible, of course, we will never get anything. And the only thing we will achieve is an antagonistic relationship which serves no one.
Yeah. One thing I remember you tweeting about the French report, how now the table has flipped. We are the emerging economy. We're expecting to get technological transfer from China. So was the expectation that Macron's visit will facilitate some more Chinese investment into France? That would tie with the Chinese technological transfer. Was that also an expectation?
Yeah, there is an expectation, and I think, to be honest, from China's side, that could be something that they can, that they could consider, because this is fair. I will say, because China did that a lot to the West as well, in a mutually agreeable way, not as a diktat, basically company by company. Okay, you want access to our market, but we need help developing for this or that technology. So let's find a win-win here. So you could very much imagine, something similar where, let's say Huawei is allowed to sell its phones or something to the European market, but they help Europe in some ways. Commit to taking some suppliers for Europe, or opening a factory in Europe, or something like that. But I think the issue is that Europe wants to do it in a diktat way, where they want to set some rules at the European level, saying, no, China needs to give us their technology if they want access to the European market, and so on, in a confrontational way. And that sort of approach never really works with China. It's very much against the culture, which is all about mutual respect. So I think there needs to be, again, a mindset shift in Europe, where they need to understand the way China works, where you can actually get things from China. The Chinese are, businessmen, negotiators. They're very pragmatic. As soon as you treat with them as equals and with respect, I think that's the basic thing that needs to be understood, and which very much isn't the case still in France. I mean, when you listen to people in France, the French media and so on, we're still, you can still hear almost like 19th century rhetoric on China, where, we still view them as almost like, uncivilized tribe that needs Western enlightenment and so on. Like it's insane. It's insane how we are like. Let me give you an example. Recently, there was a French MP. The only thing he tweeted was Taiwan is Chinese. It's true if you look at it under any angle. Like politically, it's true. Even from the Taiwanese angle, because it's independent. So, even in their constitution, it's true that Taiwan is Chinese. is true from a cultural standpoint. Taiwan is Chinese because it's mostly Han Chinese living there. They speak, Chinese, and so on and so forth. So there is no controversy at all with that statement. Taiwan is Chinese, but that created a huge outcry in France. And you had all French media saying this is CCP propaganda, and Taiwan is a sovereign country. Complete historical revisionism. So that's France right now, still in that and of course that is not conducive to understanding China and treating them with respect, and therefore getting some actual concrete things done with China. We're shooting ourselves in the foot, I think.
I mean, it's very baffling from the Chinese perspective, because it's like, what does France have to do with Taiwan? What does Europe have to do with Taiwan? This is like, Europe is not even a major colonial power that's deeply involved in the region anymore. Why do you care? And also, it is official position of all the major countries around the world to recognize that, one China principle, that Taiwan is part of China and the only legal representative of China is the government in Beijing. So, it's kind of baffling why there would even be a media storm over a statement like this. Like, what does Taiwan issue have to do with France? What does it have to do with Europe? It's crazy.
And the most baffling thing is that it's getting worse. Like if you reread what was written about Taiwan under De Gaulle, for instance, it was actually much more reasonable, even though at the time we were during the Cold War. So you would think that the anti-communism would be much more virulent. And even though at the time France was way more powerful than it is today. So if there had been a Taiwan war or a Taiwan issue, we could actually have done something about it. But no, we were, way more reasonable. Like I was reading the book of De Gaulle's right-hand man at the time, a guy called Alain Perfit, and he was describing Taiwan as China's Alsace-Lorraine. In France, we had an issue where we had lost Alsace-Lorraine to the Germans, and during decades, the battle cry in France was we need to get back Alsace-Lorraine, which we did in the First World War. And it's true to some degree, it is China's Alsace-Lorraine. I mean, it matters as much to China as it did, as Alsace-Lorraine did to us. So there was some pragmatism, some understanding that is largely gone, at least from the mainstream. Right now, the mainstream is basically completely aligned on Taiwan, aligned very much with that, liberal internationalists. We need to kind of end of history Fukuyama type line, which is somewhat bizarre because that line is disappearing from everywhere. The US is moving out of it, as is obvious from their latest national security strategy. So Europe is less powerful, is the last bastion of this type of supremacist Western thinking, which it cannot act upon because it's not powerful at all anymore. So yeah, it is. It's just pure ideology. It's just bizarre.
How did that happen though? How did kind of the neoliberal internationalist, or some people say globalist ideology take over France? because that was obviously not the case back in 1960s.
Yeah, so I think during the Cold War, after de Gaulle, and all the way until the Cold War, there was a pretty vivid intellectual ferment in France, where a lot of French intellectuals were communists, even Maoists. There were an enormous amount of Maoists in France. Some of the biggest French philosophers were very devoted Maoists, and some very famous filmmakers as well. Like when my dad was young, you could see some movies in the cinema in France praising the Cultural Revolution and the Red Guards. Like, that was France at the time. It's crazy to think right now, but France was very much like that. But then the end of the Cold War came, and there was sort of this triumph of the liberal internationalist / globalist line, and all those intellectuals sort of did their mea culpa, saying, yeah, we were stupid, and sorry, and so very few stayed on the Maoist line. A few did, but very, very few, and that's been the case since then. Basically, there was a shift then, maybe helped by the US, which has very strong influence networks in France, and a lot of top French leaders were invited to the US, and even maybe paid sometimes on some sort of scholarships and so on. So anyway, there was an eradication of this alternative thinking in France, basically, at least in the mainstream, and we're still on that line. And what we need to understand about European thinking is that it's actually quite, ideology is very strong. You can remember during the Middle Age, we used to burn people at the stake if they were thinking wrongly, right? It's in Europe that there was the Inquisition. So anyone that was considered heretical, like, thinking wrong, we would literally burn them. So that's, we come from that sort of tradition. If you deviate from the mainstream thinking, it's actually very violent. The ecosystem, the atmosphere in France. So like that guy, that MP I was speaking about earlier, who tweeted just Taiwan is Chinese. The reaction from the media is extraordinarily violent. Like, there was no one defending him, except maybe people from his French political group. Still, I'm not even sure, but that's like, it's social death for the guy. And so it's a very heavy intellectual atmosphere where maybe some people want to express other thoughts, but they know that if they do so, then it's social death. So yeah, that's the environment.
Speaking of ideological struggle, another thing I fail to understand is the Ukraine issue. I mean, U.S. for the longest time, Europe has been following Washington's lead on the whole Ukraine crisis. Now Washington wants to wash his hands of the Ukraine, want to reach a settlement with Russia. Why? I fail to, from my perspective, I'm baffled why Europe didn't just simply go along with that, and why are they saying they're going to pick up the slack if Washington refused to support Ukraine, they will do it themselves. Like, but why? That was like in a Washington-led project from the beginning. Why these kind of attachment to that whole project? I fail to understand, because wouldn't making peace be better for everyone, especially for people in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit baffling. I agree with you. So on it's hard to explain exactly why. So one line of thinking is that it's actually a way to manufacture consent for independent military in Europe. So, showing the European population there is war in Europe. Ukraine is in Europe. We have an enemy, which is Russia. Hence, the need to increase our military budget. And as a result, cut your pensions, cut social expenses, and so on and so forth. You need that sort of justification. Another line of thinking is that quite few things keep the European project alive. Like can act as some sort of federating idea, and having an enemy, having a war is always a very useful thing to kind of unite different peoples around something common. Like the US has used that a lot, right? Where they're not united, they're actually very divided, the United States. But so often they've used wars as a way to rally their population around a common goal. So I think that the EU plays a lot on that, using Ukraine, the boogeyman of Russia, as some sort of rallying cry, right? Those are, if I want to be generous, those are the two explanations, most likely explanations that I can see. And then maybe it's simply that Europe, often functions at the lowest common denominator. You need to put 27 people in agreement on something, which is not easy because those are quite different nations. Like you have the Baltics, which are extremely hostile to Russia, right? In fact, most of Eastern Europe is. And then you have some countries which are, more favorable, like Hungary and so on. And each has a voice, each has a vote, equal vote. And when you have such disagreement, often the best course of action is simply nothing. Like you just stay the course. There is paralysis. You just, keep doing the same thing over and over again. And in the absence of and propose a alternative vision, and someone who is ready to, change course completely, and, maybe out Trump and say, we're going to be the ones to negotiate with Russia. I will speak with Putin. We will propose our own deal, and we won't let Trump do that. Like that takes an enormous amount of political courage. Like who in Europe could do that today? You just don't have any von der Leyen, even less. There is, like, Macron doesn't have any credibility because he's absolutely hated by Russia. It's also an absence of charismatic, visionary, popular leaders who can propose a vision.
What is the future of European project at this point? I mean, I just speaking of Europe, and you mentioned there's many differences among its member nations. I remember the Nexperia case. The Dutch economic minister was brought before EU to ask about why he did not inform EU or China about his decision to seize Nexperia from the Chinese parent company Wintech, and he said, "Oh, it's because the less people know about it, the better." We don't have time to inform everybody, including EU, because then the Chinese might have the time to act, which make me question. So who is setting the policy here? If like an individual economic minister of Netherlands, in this case, his action actually impacted all of EU as a whole, because he created the whole semiconductor supply chain crisis by the seizing of Nexperia that impacted the German and the French automakers. Yet he decided, okay, I don't need to consult with anybody, including the EU politicians. I can just go ahead and make this decision on my own, and which he stood by it. He said he would do it again, even given what had happened. What is your I want your take on like the future of the EU project?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's very clear that things don't work today, right? And the Nexperia case is a great example, because it shows there is no strategy, there is no coordination, it's just a mess. And what I always say when it comes to Europe is there is either too much Europe or not enough. But the amount right now is not okay. So either Europe becomes, almost like a federation, like an actual state with, the power of a state, coordination. It can really impose things on its members, and it is coherent, and you don't have this mess where all 27 need to agree on everything, which leads to paralysis and so on, where, that would enable some sort of coherent strategy to emerge from this whole thing, because you have, federal government deciding on the top, and this is our way, this is the European way, we go for it. Or you have less Europe, where you give back some of the sovereignty that was taken away from European nations to them, and then it's really countries which are in charge. So this is nations with their sovereignty being able to decide most things. But the current sort of mix of both is clearly very messy and doesn't work. So like it's the famous Kissinger sentence: Europe, who do I call? There is no one you call. It's just a mess. You don't know who to speak with, who speaks for Europe. Like Macron yesterday on his way back from China, he was behaving as if he was speaking for Europe, but it doesn't. Von der Leyen often acts as if she speaks for Europe, but she doesn't. She doesn't have any power to speak for Europe, especially on foreign affairs. It's just weird. You arrive at a stage where it's just weak and without a voice, and reduced to having to look pathetic as it does today. So yeah, I think it's either or. Either you really build a concrete European project, which is actually a country, a federation, and so on, or you're like, okay, we went too far with Europe, let's give back their voice to European nations on some of their power.
So do you think there's any hope for either the European elite or the French elite in particular to adopt a more realistic approach in dealing with China? Because right now, as you mentioned, expectations in their dealing with China totally does not match reality on the ground. What would it take, in your opinion, would make them to come to a grip with the reality?
So, first of all, I think that people in France actually are more pragmatic than we sometimes assume. But I think there is a lot of fear of speaking out. As I was speaking about this sort of intellectual heaviness and the social consequences if you speak out. But when you speak with the average person, they're actually quite, not always, of course, but they remain fairly pragmatic. So let me just give you an example. I just wrote a book on China, on democracy in China. And the idea for the book didn't come from me. It came from a friend of mine who is educated in the best schools in France and is a partner of McKinsey in France. And he's never been to China. But on his own, independently, always being in France, he came to the conclusion that China was a democracy and maybe even more democratic than France. And that guy is very educated, best schools in France, top job, McKinsey, and so on. So it shows that it's possible. Those people exist, right? So it's about changing sort of I don't think it will take much. The DNA is there. Some of the right ideas are in people's mind. It's about lifting the heaviness that's in the mainstream, on sort of liberating people to be more pragmatic and ridiculing the ideology which so many people can see is ridiculed anyway, but it's taken seriously right now, and so no one can say it's ridiculous. But if people started to say so, then I think things could change quite fast. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but I think so.
I like to leave on an optimistic note, and that it does offer a glimmer of hope. What is there any other topic that you wish to discuss today that we have not covered, Arnaud?
No, I think when it comes to Macron and France, that's all. I guess the other big thing these days is the national security strategy of the US, but that would be another hour or so to discuss it. It's a big thing. So yeah, maybe there you go. An opportunity to come back on your podcast. Yeah, exactly.
Next episode, we're gonna have Arnaud Bertrand back on my show so we can go over the latest published U.S. national security paper, because that's very interesting, because you kind of lay out this the new strategic priority of the United States. And it's kind of drastic departure, as you pointed out in your tweet, from the past when U.S. and there's less ideological language, talking about spreading democracy and values. It's very more realist take on international relations and geopolitics. And but unfortunately, we're already
interestingly actually. Yeah. Just interestingly, there is still some ideological language, but not towards China or Russia anymore, but towards Europe. So it's kind of shifted. That's quite funny.
Yeah. Well, okay. That is a whole episode by itself. So look forward to that. I'm gonna have Arnaud back to discuss that, because that is a very important topic. And for people who want to follow you or Arnaud, your work, where would they go?
On Twitter, on Substack, Arnaud Bertrand, just my name, so it's easy.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Arnaud, for making the time to speak to us.
Thank you, Carl.
And for people are listening, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, bye bye.